This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
The Canadian government said on Friday it will join some of its closest allies in lowering the price cap for Russian oil over its continued war in Ukraine, the country's finance department said in a statement on Friday. Canada will lower the price cap for seaborne Russian origin crude oil to $47.60 from $60 per barrel, the statement said. The price cap move brings Canada in line with the European Union and the United Kingdom, who announced in July they would lower the cap as they target Russia's oil revenues and ramp up pressure on Moscow over the war.
Oil held steady on Friday as markets awaited a meeting in coming days between Russian President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump, but prices marked their steepest weekly losses since late June on a tariff-hit economic outlook. Brent crude futures settled 16 cents, or 0.2%, higher at $66.59 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures were unchanged at $63.88. U.S. crude fell over 1% earlier in the session after Bloomberg News reported that Washington and Moscow were aiming to reach a deal to halt the war in Ukraine that would lock in Russia's occupation of territory seized during its military invasion.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
OPEC's oil output rose further in July after an OPEC Plus agreement to raise production, a Reuters survey found on Friday, although the hike was limited by Iraq making additional cuts and by drone attacks on Kurdish oil fields. The OPEC pumped 27.38 million barrels per day last month, up 270,000 barrels of oil per day from June's revised total, the survey showed, with the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia making the largest increases. OPEC Plus is accelerating its plan to unwind its most recent layer of output cuts. At the same time, some members are required to make extra cuts to compensate for earlier overproduction, in theory limiting the impact of the hikes.
India's biggest state refiners Indian Oil Corp and Bharat Petroleum have bought at least 22 million barrels of non-Russian crude for delivery in September and October, trade sources said, after the U.S. pressured India to halt purchases from Russia. Indian state refiners had been largely absent from the spot market since 2022, instead becoming one of the few purchasers of cheaper Russian crude after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They paused Russian purchases in late July after pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump. As President Trump is applying pressure on the country of India, not individual entities, no doubt, there will be discussion between the government and those refiners continuing to import, said Harry Chilingwirian, Group Head of Research at Onyx Capital Group. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. Copper prices crept higher for a third consecutive session on Friday, bolstered by hopes of U.S. interest rate cuts after a central bank appointment and upbeat economic data in China. Benchmark 3-month LME copper on the London Metal Exchange had gained 0.8% to $9,759 a metric ton by 16:02 GMT, extending a rebound after touching its lowest in 3 weeks on July 31. U.S. President Donald Trump on Thursday announced his pick to fill a vacant seat at the Federal Reserve, boosting hopes of interest rate cuts and weakening the dollar.
Iron ore futures edged lower on Friday but logged a weekly gain, supported by China's record high steel exports, robust mill margins, and low inventories. The most traded September iron ore contract on China's Dalian Commodity Exchange traded 0.19% lower at 790 yuan, $109.99, a metric ton. Still, the contract rose 0.7% this week. The benchmark September iron ore on the Singapore Exchange was 0.15% lower at $102.10 a ton, but up 2.1% so far this week, as of 07:07 GMT.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
World food commodity prices rose in July to their highest in over 2 years, as a jump for vegetable oils and record levels for meat outweighed falling cereal, dairy and sugar prices, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization said. The FAO Food Price Index, which serves as a global benchmark for food commodity prices, averaged 130.1 points in July, a 1.6% increase from June, FAO said. That was the highest reading since February 2023, though the index was 18.8% below its peak of March 2022, which followed Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.